Splatterhouse 3, in its original form, never came to the United Kingdom. The original 2 games in Namco's horror beat-em-up trilogy both came out in Europe, but the third one never arrived, meaning I only discovered it years later once emulation and ports began appearing on later games consoles. The original game in particular was something of a cult classic, not particularly because it was more violent than any other video game of the time, but because of the way it lent into and it glorified the gore and the violence. Inspired by Friday the 13th and other slasher movies of the time, the series features a masked vigilante punching and slashing his way through hordes of zombies and other monstrous creatures, beating them into a bloody pulp or hunks of other unidentified meat. The graphics of the arcade and then the Sega Mega Drive machines of the age meant that even this had a cartoonish sheen, but so did almost everything else at the time. But when Splatterhouse's horror B-movie aesthetic began to move from the arcades and into people's living room, with the sequels released on the Genesis in North America, some parents began to take note. Internally, Sega believed that over a third of the consumers who played their games were over 18, meaning that there was certainly an adult market of gamers to cater for. Players not particularly well served by Nintendo's insistence that all games be family friendly in all regards. Yet, perhaps specifically because of Nintendo's family-friendly image, many families believed that these consoles were for children. They were disposable kids' toys. Namco released Splatterhouse 2 in 1992 and they put on the box a parental advisory notice. The box art very clearly shows the content and the theme of the game. No one should buy this in any doubt of what it contains. Yet, some parents were still surprised when they walked in and saw their children in the living room smearing themselves in the blood of crucified monsters as they played through the game. The games that are famous for causing international outcry for the violence and the inappropriate themes for young children are Mortal Kombat and Night Trap. The first glorifies the violence, featuring broken bones and cracked skulls, and the latter introduces the concept of men preying on teenage girls. But Sega was already conscious and working against this backlash long before it happened. The moment that the American government began to seriously even consider regulating against video games infecting young children's mind, they struck out with their own internal rating system to prove that they knew their business. They set up a Video Games Rating Council in North America, and they classified all of their games into 3 categories. General audience, i.e. anything appropriate for everyone no matter how young. MA13, for mature audiences which require some parental discretion. This was for teenagers looking for something a little edgier, maybe including some blood and graphic violence, but nothing too hardcore. Then they had the upper limit of MA17, games clearly inappropriate for minors, with extreme violence and sexual themes, so therefore recommended for people aged 17 and up. Sega offered this to all publishers on their system as a voluntary sign-up thing, and the majority of games released on their systems in 1993 did sign up. Splatterhouse 3 was one of the first games to test this system, and the council rated it as MA13. Was that enough to satiate the concerned parental groups rallying against the industry? Well, let's have a look at the game. It's an immediate evolution on the first 2 in the trilogy, in that it offers some movement around the rooms in the quasi 3D vein of Streets of Rage. With his additional mobility, the main character Rick now has to play slightly more tactically to dodge attacks and to ensure that he's not surrounded by the monstrous eldritch horrors of the mansion. Each level sees you working your way through a labyrinth to hunt down the boss, each representing a different floor of the building where you're free to explore different routes on your way through. This is a good idea in principle, but the game's own concept works against exploration as you're also battling against the timer. Every level there's a timer counting down, as either your wife or son is in mortal peril. Fail to reach and pummel the boss in time and they die. There honestly is no point exploring. As soon as you clear the enemies in the first room, you can access the map and plot the most direct route to the goal. And as the timer is particularly punishing, any deviation will inevitably result in missing out on the best ending, where Rick and his family reunite at the end. In some senses, I admire the purity of Splatterhouse 3. The game has cut out everything but the brawler aspects, making this the most complete version of the original trilogy in the core execution. However, the design actively pushes against you savouring the moment. Many of the enemies have punishingly high health, so it inevitably descends into a lengthy button mashing session to keep them down whilst you watch the timer slowly click away. Worse, get hit even once and Rick flies to the floor and it takes an agonisingly lengthy time to stand back up again. Splatterhouse 3 is great fun to play and a good experience to sample, but mastering it to get the happy ending is a punishing experience. Besides the gory visuals, the most harrowing part is probably the setting. The game features what was, in 1993, some pretty snazzy digitised graphics, and the way it relays the horror of your wife being terrorised or slowly consumed by the Evil One's monsters are pretty intimidating. I definitely wouldn't want my young children seeing this. But the Video Game Rating Council was always doomed. Partly because Sega shot themselves in the foot by being inconsistent in their censorship. If you have an MA-17 rating, why are you still modifying Japanese imported games to remove the nudity? Why is Mortal Kombat 1 MA-13 whereas Mortal Kombat 2 is MA-17? But perhaps the larger issue is that Nintendo refused to come on board. Worldwide, the Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo consoles were neck and neck, but in America, where the Ratings Council was established, Nintendo were clearly winning the battle. Some companies, most famously Sierra, approached the council to put PC games through the certification, but largely all non-Sega games ignored this voluntary mandate. And so the ESRB was established in 1994, a mere 18 months after the Video Game Rating Council had been rolled out, and a new age rating system was pushed across North America. Other countries developed their own age rating systems, meaning there are a few common standards across the world now. And according to PEGI, the pan-European agency largely adopted in the UK, Sega was probably right. Splatterhouse 3 never came out here, but Splatterhouse 1 and 2 were both granted 12 ratings for the violence they contain, when they were eventually released on the Nintendo Wii Virtual Console, with the 3D remake years later getting an 18 rating. Sega, winning the argument but never the war. I think that's them all over, isn't it?